Black Sabbath, The Mob Rules is the name of the song from the album by the same name. This would, of course, be post Ozzy Osbourne material with Mr. Dio standing in from 1981. Album cover, if you haven't seen it, is quite interesting to say the least. So if you're bored with nothing better to do, take a look at that. My name is Jason. This is episode 15 of Hexes and Soldiers. And it seems like forever since I've talked to you guys. I'm not sure why it feels like that. It hasn't been that long. I guess I've just grown that fond of you. So, shout outs. I'm going to do a different kind of shout out here and say anybody unfamiliar with or vaguely familiar with the Wounded Warrior Project and what they're doing, as well as the Paralyzed Veterans of America, check those organizations out because they're doing wonderful things. And while you're there, maybe you might feel inclined to donate a buck or two. So check that out. And then, as far as show age, the show has made it through infancy, and we've watched it grow through the toddler years, on up through adolescence and the pre-teen years, and now we have a bona fide teenager on our hands who is, I don't know, eligible to get a learner's permit to drive. So beware as the show hones its driving skills. And regarding this show, I can only imagine what the show will be like when it turns 18 and even 21 for that matter. So we'll see how that goes. And then regarding this show and its listeners, we officially have enough for a platoon. So if a war of shows ever broke out, well, it wouldn't be pretty, but at least we'd hang on for a while. Unless, of course, we got stuck squaring off against Marco Wargamer, who could effectively field, I think, an entire brigade, or the Doctor, for that matter, from Guns, Dice, and Butter, who could deploy a full corps. So let's ensure that they, among others, remain contented allies. So what's new with me, you ask? And I'm glad you asked. Not a whole lot. I was able to attend a Mardi Gras parade a couple nights ago, which was very interesting. I'd never been to one of these things. I was pelted repeatedly with coins and beads and plastic things, and enjoyed that. And of course, the big day is this Tuesday, which I doubt if I get out. The traffic is just outrageous, and among other things, so I'll probably hide out. And my esteemed associate is out of town working on a documentary film, so looks like I have bachelor's rights for the next 2 days. And been playing some stuff, but you'll hear about that in a little while. So in the news, GMT will be reprinting a few games, the order of which will more or less look something like this. You're going to see Twilight Struggle first, followed by Dominant Species, the Commands and Colors series, and then a Combat Commander series, followed by some card-driven games, and then Deluxe Alexander and SPQR, and finally everything else, as they say. So, and sometime around the fourth quarter this year, looks like they'll be doing from 2 to 5 card-driven games, depending, in this particular order: Empire of the Sun first, followed by For the People, then Paths of Glory, Successors, and finally Washington's War. And Fields of Fire 2, the second edition, will be reprinting along with Fields of Fire with the Old Breed in the third quarter. And then Normandy 44 and Ukraine 43. Regarding those, apparently Mark is actively working on these, especially the Ukraine game, which includes quite a few improvements. But we will not see these until after the card-driven games when it comes to line of priority. And then in the distant future, Mr. Vance Von Bory's East Front series will get I don't know if it is well deserved or needed, but nevertheless it will get a facelift. So those games, it looks like, will be updated. And then GMT's charging and shipping schedule looks something like this. Shipping for the following 3 P500 items will begin this Friday, February 21st. And that, of course, was Combat Commander Sea Lion, Combat Commander reprint, and then another Combat Commander reprint. So as far as charging goes, they'll begin charging for Unconditional Surrender on the 26th of February, which is already passed, and expect to ship that game in early to mid-March. And in April, looks like Panzer Expansion number 3, Drive to the Rhine, should be ready to go. And probably the biggest news regarding game releases, I'm going to go out on a limb in saying that, is Consim Press and GMT's new P500 edition of Silent Victory, which is much like the successful Hunters game, except it takes place in the Pacific. And of course, the second edition of the Hunters is coming, but if you can't wait, there's at least 5 copies last time I checked for sale on Board Game Geek, and a couple on eBay here and there. And it looks like Enterprise Games may in fact still have some copies in stock. I'm not sure about that. Finally, GMT has a fairly extensive living P500 list, so if you're at all curious, take a look at that. Then moving to Consim World, Ghost Panzer game that is, I don't know if it's out, but it's coming out. Anyway, review by Keith Medlin, and a fantastic review. This guy pulls all the stops and goes in depth into the game itself, but then goes a step further in comparing and contrasting it to what he calls the big three. And I won't argue too loudly with that. Conflict of Heroes, ASL, and Combat Commander. Compares all of them, gives the pros and cons of each, and man, this dude did a great job writing this. And if I ran a magazine or a game company, I would probably make an attempt to employ this gentleman. And for you lock and load fans, Line of Fire issue 14 is out and has a World at War Blood and Bridges expansion module in there entitled Baltic Fury. So for you fans of that, scoop that up. And Compass Games looks like has released Breaking the Chains, which simulates a hypothetical future military conflict over the South China and East China Seas around the year 2021. And the basic premise is China comes to blows with a Southeast Asian country that spills over into numerous other countries. So anybody interested in that type of thing, there you go. And regarding the top 10, it is not officially a top 10 this week. It has been truncated to a top 5. And I guess I did that for lack of material. But then again, you could say, well, there's stuff, yeah, but I don't know if it's even worth mentioning. So the top 5 will be submarine games, as you might have guessed this show might be about, via the image and the ping at the beginning of the episode. So we'll start with number 5 and go with Attack Sub, 1991, Courtney Allen, Avalon Hill. And Attack Sub is a card-based war game similar to Upfront. I don't know if any of you are familiar with that, but Upfront was a fantastic game. The topic is modern submarine warfare, and I have this game on the shelf. It was inherited from my brother. I don't even think I've opened it. But modern submarine warfare, mostly U.S. NATO versus Soviet Warsaw Pact, but there is an occasional Falklands War scenario. Each player has one or more subs and or surface ships. Each ship is represented on an individual large card with counters showing current contact status and damage. And each player plays cards to increase their contact level relative to their opponent. Contact level abstractly represents relative position and sonar readings. And it is possible for one ship to have a better contact on his enemy than the enemy has on him. When a high enough contact level is reached, torpedoes can be fired. So number 5, Attack Sub. Number 4, U-Boat Leader, 2011. This is a Dan Viersen game. Looks like a Dave Schuler is the designer, however. And a solitary game puts you in charge of a group of U-boats. And I do not own that and have not played it. Number 3, Steel Wolves, the German submarine campaign against Allied shipping. This came out in 2010. Stephen Jackson and Brian Miller were the designers. Compass Games, World War II, Solitaire, which takes place from roughly 39 to 43. And as you'll see or may already know, there's really no point in representing a anything to do with German subs post 43, as everything had turned so drastically. But you, as the player, are supreme commander of the entire U-boat's Kriegsmarine. So this looks to be a bit more strategic in feel. Number two, Silent War 2005. Compass Games, Brian Miller. Solitaire World War II sub game of the U.S. versus Japan. And this would be Steel Wolf's older brother. Here, too, you command an entire fleet. So that was number two, Silent War. And then number one, The Creature That Ate Sheboygan. No, that's not number one, but I do, I do hear this game mentioned from time to time, and I think it pops up here and there at certain game conventions. It looks fun, monster game, literally. I think it's the creature is loosely based on Godzilla. Anyway, no, the number one game is the Hunters, and I won't go too much into that as I will be going into that at length here in a second. So those are your top five sub games, and then honorable mention will go to a 1976 title by Mr. Stephen Peake from Avalon Hill entitled Submarine. It is a World War II sub game, and the sub is hidden with movements secretly plotted and isn't revealed until picked up by sonar. So basically, with these sub games, if you liked hide and seek as a kid, you're probably going to like submarine warfare. And then, of course, you can't not mention Hunt for Red October, Red Storm Rising's sister from 1988, Douglas Niles TSR release, which, of course, I don't know if anybody's read the book, depicts modern naval combat in the North Atlantic. You got Soviets versus NATO. And I don't have, nor have I played either Red Storm Rising or Hunt for Red October, but I'm going to assume that the game mechanic is roughly the same, and the game boards look similar. And I think you can pair the two of these together somehow and fight a gigantic, I don't know, battle. But I would be interested in getting Red Storm Rising and have been for a while. I just have yet to do so. So there's your top five sub games with honorable mention included. And that brings us to the meat of the matter. And regarding the meat of the matter, as you may or may have not noticed, I don't know how you couldn't have, the image for this show and the sonar ping at the beginning would, as you may have correctly deduced, indicate an episode that deals with subs. So rather than go directly into my experience with the Hunters, I thought I would go briefly over U-boat warfare, specifically North Atlantic 1939, and I give a kind of overview. Of course, U-boats were the key component of the Battle of the Atlantic during the war, and Churchill himself said the only thing that he really feared during the war was the U-boat peril. And early on, that was not an irrational fear, as the U-boats were doing quite a lot of damage, extensive damage, to shipping and just sinking tonnage left and right. Dönitz, the commander of the Kriegsmarine, said, "Give me 300 U-boats." I guess meaning, that's all I need, and I can defeat the British. He gets 50, and this is initially at the war's outset. Of course, more will be produced as the war progresses, but he only gets 50 at the outset. And U-boats spent most of their time on the surface, and that's contrary to what I think is popular belief. They didn't spend a majority of their time submerged. And of course, on the surface, they can run their diesel engines, charge their batteries, and they really only dove when attacked or for very rare daytime torpedo attacks. So, and then of course, it's the early period when you get individual heroics via U-boat aces. And the game, The Hunters, lists historical U-boat aces. I think it lists 6 or 7 of them. And one of them that doesn't list is Kretschmer. And this is kind of the end of Kretschmer is kind of the end of the individual U-boat aces. Once he's captured, tactics change, and necessarily so. You can't keep doing the same thing and expect to have success. So what happens is wolf packs are formed, and basically this is pretty much what it sounds like. Groups of subs hunt together and take out particular targets. So the sinking of Allied ships early on in the war was actually so successful it garnered its own period title, and the Germans referred to this as Die glückliche Zeit, or the happy time, and that should be self-explanatory there. Of course, by 41, the U-boat fleet size had doubled, and training of crews and captains was expedited to a detrimental extent, such that as a result, Dönitz himself begins conducting convoy attacks via radio, and the amount of orders that he's sending and whatnot via radio is increased. So you've got almost constant radio chatter going on, which is not necessarily a good thing because the Allies can target this chatter and where it's coming from. So by war's end, you have nearly 3,000 Allied ships sunk, and that is a hell of a figure, and still wasn't good enough, which is even more baffling. Regarding the subs and specifically their armament, the torpedoes initially were like arrows shot from a bow. Once it's launched, wherever the line of sight it's launched from, that's the line of sight it goes down, and that's it. Cross your fingers. But later, development allowed for homing and pattern running torpedoes. Now, I don't know how many of these things were produced. And of course, the problem with more technologically advanced anything, uh, the higher that goes, the higher the rate of failure goes. So I don't know how many of them, the ones that they did have, how many of them were efficient and actually worked. You had two basic types of triggers: a pistol trigger regarding your torpedoes that detonated on impact, which is probably the one everybody thinks of when they think of a torpedo. But you also had a magnetic trigger, and I wasn't aware of this, but this thing would detonate upon sensing a change in the magnetic field. And that sounds pretty advanced for the time. But I guess what would happen is these things would get near a big hunk of metal like a ship, sense that, and detonate. It's kind of interesting. Duds were a common problem, and this is represented to a fair extent in the game The Hunters, especially early on in the war. You have to roll a 1 die 6 for every hit. And if you roll a 1 or a 2, it's a dud. So, yeah, a lot of these were duds. And like I said, especially during the early part of the war, specifically the first 8 months. And this was perhaps most evident in Operation Weserübung, or the invasion of Norway, where skilled U-boat commanders were unable to inflict damage on British transports and warships. So there were many various types of U-boats produced, and I won't go into all of them, but the workhorse of the fleet was undoubtedly the Type 7. And this is the type of boat that I used in my experience with the Hunters. The Type 7 was also the most widely produced. So I guess you could call it the Sherman of the war. The most advanced sub produced was probably the Type 21 Electro Boot, and this was the first boat whose primary function would take place underwater. It boasted a streamlined hull, which in fact the USS Nautilus nuclear sub copied this sub's streamlined design. So a very advanced boat for its time. Eventually, technology helps the Allies out, and the Allies are able to start turning the tide regarding the U-boat threat. And sonar worked great against submerged vessels, but not so well against surface vessels. Hence, a U-boat at night or in bad weather actually fared better on the surface. And radar advancements also helped turn the tide, especially aircraft mounted radar. And of course, with every measure, you get a countermeasure. So once the Allies have radar, the Germans developed radar detectors, which forces the Allies to develop more advanced radar. And I think the apex of this development um, was cinemetric radar, which the Germans were unable to detect. So late in the war, the Germans implemented the snorkel technique. There's another thing I was unaware of. And it's an idea they got from the Dutch. And this allowed the boats to submerge to about periscope depth, but still charge their batteries and stay hidden. So that was kind of cool. And if advances in radar weren't enough, the Allies eventually cracked the Enigma code, which broke the camel's back. And I think what they did was they figured out that there was some weather boats, German weather boats somewhere, and of course weather boats aren't very well able to defend themselves. And they were able to raid one of these boats, which had an Enigma machine on board. And of course, these machines were used to decode and to encode ingoing and outgoing messages. And once the Allies got a hold of one of these, the gig was up. And from that point on, anything and everything that was sent via radio was being read in Bletchley Park in Britain. And anybody that's unfamiliar with Bletchley Park, do yourself a favor and read up. Very interesting side to the history when it comes to World War II, as this place was full of people who were chess, how do you put it, like chess wizards and crossword puzzle wizards, and anybody that was good at decoding ciphers for whatever reason. And, all these people, the brightest of the brightest, had conglomerated there to work on cracking the German code, which eventually was done with the capturing of this Enigma machine. And I think there's a movie. I don't know how accurate this thing would be, but made a while ago regarding the capture of the Enigma. But anyway, yeah. So also the Allies begin adapting their tactics, and they start running escorts and firing depth charges as countermeasures, which were honed to such an extent that they actually became very, very successful with this stuff. But regarding the submariners of U-boats, the casualty rate of a submariner was 75%, which was the highest of all German forces in the war. So when you got in one of these things, you're pretty much guaranteed not to return. So regarding the Type 7, I'll just give you a basic schematic of the boat, and I'll leave it at that. But your propulsion was two supercharged six-cylinder four-stroke diesel engines. For all you gearheads out there that knows what that means, that seems pretty impressive. The speed was about 17.7 knots, or 20 miles an hour on the surface, and 7.6 knots, or about 9 miles an hour submerged. So these things were not very fast at all when it came to underwater maneuvering. Its test depth was about 750 feet, and you're looking at crush depth occurring between 820 and 968 feet, I guess, depending on what day of the week it is. Armament, 5 torpedo tubes, that would be 4 bow, 1 stern, and a total capacity of 14 torpedoes could be taken out to sea. So, as far as the game goes, it does have various items represented that can be damaged. You've got periscope, radio, hydrophones, batteries. You have 2 electric engines and 2 diesel engines, dive planes, and at one point my dive planes became inoperable as I tried to fix them and failed. And it was during the day, and I was able to evade detection, and this baffled me because I thought, if I can't dive, how was I able to get away? Well, as it turns out, the dive planes are not necessarily what cause you to dive. So that was a misunderstanding on my part. And what the dive planes do is they adjust the attitude of the boat and maintain depth when submerged, and at near neutral buoyancy. So, another thing that I found interesting that I thought I would share, I don't know if anybody's checked out hexesandsoldiers.blogspot.com. I mentioned a book on there that relates to U boat warfare, but there is another book, and also in the Hunters, if you look in the rule book, bless the designer, he has designer notes, but also for further reading, and of course, that Hunter's book is mentioned in there, as well as The Hunted, which is the second part of that author's work, and that is the later years in which the U boats then become the Hunted. A couple other books, but there's one he doesn't mention, and that's fine. I'll mention it for him. Iron Coffins by Herbert Werner. And this gentleman actually served in a number of U boats during the war and wrote an account of these experiences, which resulted in the book Iron Coffins. He had served in 5 different boats, and I'll give you a brief rundown because it's just interesting and it's related to what we're talking about. So, he served in 5 different boats until finally becoming detained by the Allies, and I'll go more into that in a bit. But his first boat was, wouldn't you guess, a Type 7, but his was a Type 7C, known as the U-557. That was the number of his boat. And of note was the journey to Kiel, during which a routine trim dive. He says the boat plunged to the bottom of the Baltic, which had to have been nerve-wracking. One man died in the accident, and the boat was trapped on the seabed. And it was only after many hours of exhausting bailing of water from the stern to the bow and lots of movement by the crew as a sort of human counterweight that the sub came free and surfacing after 20 hours and resuming her passage to Kiel. And that brings to mind the movie Das Boot, in which they are submerged and are forced to run pails of water down a line in an attempt to do roughly the same thing. He also talks of being on the bridge for 9 hours straight during another time while they hunted a freighter, which turned out to be the boat's first victim, and shortly after resulted in many among the crew experiencing for the first time what it was like to be hunted. And he goes in detail describing the metallic ping of the ASDIC, or sonar, striking the hull and ringing throughout the boat, and the death charges that ensued. The U-557 was also one of many boats called to aid the Bismarck when it was being sunk. And I believe he was on that boat and received a distress call when they had to do what they could when they got there. There wasn't much they could do but look for survivors, which must have been an ominous and depressing task. All told, it was 8 weeks before Werner could bathe and shave as his first patrol came to an end. Now, I've gone maybe 3 days without a shower and felt pretty cruddy, but to go 8 weeks without a shower, I mean, the shaving thing, okay, but without a shower, Jesus. The second and third patrols were rather routine, with a number of sinkings here and there and a number of successful evasions. The next boat looks like the U-612, which has a short lifespan as it collides with a U-444 and sinks. The boat gets raised, but the time necessary to reinstate it, it looks like it'll take 8 to 12 months, so they get a boat known as the U-230. And the first patrol on this boat proves rather fruitful, but it was around April of 43 during his second patrol that he realized the tide of the battle had really turned, and there's not much the Germans can do but stay alive, as he received continuous streams of distress calls from sinking colleagues. Once during an air attack, he relates that as their anti-aircraft gun pumped away, he writes, the pilot who had been thrown from that plane disintegrated in the explosion of the 4 bombs which were meant to destroy us. And he also talks of another time when, during another air raid, when his anti-aircraft gun jams and they're just sitting ducks. During another close episode, the boat was forced to dive for 35 hours straight, and crew members were forced to maintain their battle stations for over 70 hours straight. So I like playing war games, and the Hunters is a damn fine game, but I can't imagine being forced to play it for 70 hours straight. I guess if my life depended on it, I would play it as long as I had to. When he finally attains leave, right? He gets home. He's going to relax. He's going to see some family. Well, he learns his father has been jailed by the Gestapo for having an affair with a Jewish girl who's subsequently sent to a concentration camp. Now, I believe she goes on to survive, but that's some bad news. When he went to Berlin to see his girlfriend, well, he finds that she's been killed too in an air raid. So, going home was probably not very uplifting for him. And he tells of a secret mine laying mission and briefly describes being followed by a destroyer with an infrared searchlight. He also talks of hearing strange sounds one night in the Mediterranean while they were submerged. Uh, Caused a bit of a scare, but turns out to be dolphins. Kind of interesting. He went on to command the U-415 and spoke of D-Day a bit, during which, when he had run out of torpedoes, was told to ram a ship. Now, I've always told myself, and anybody that would listen, if only the English Channel was flooded with U-boats, D-Day would never have been able to succeed. Well, talked to a gentleman not too long ago, and he disagreed, and he kind of shed some light on that. And with the air superiority the Allies had and the ability to hunt and kill these subs, they had really gotten good at it. It would have just been like shooting fish in a barrel, or any other stupid metaphor you want to use. But even it's my understanding that my theory that you could flood the channel with subs, prevent the invasion. It's not necessarily the case. It seems like the subs would have just been picked off. And talks about following a minesweeper, and after which he quickly comes under attack. During that attack, he becomes wounded, and the boat is eventually recovered from the seabed. As a result of these attacks and the shortage of time needed to make the roughly 550 repairs, the boat had set out with 50 still unrepaired items. So the U-415 would finally succumb to an acoustic mine, of all things, near the harbor, which the Germans knew about, but they couldn't locate it. They knew it was there. I guess they just, for whatever reason, couldn't find it or relax in locating it. So I guess they were running on the surface, and the diesel engines were loud enough that when it came within a certain proximity of this acoustic mine, it was set off. And in September of 44, Warner then gets another boat, and I'm almost done here, the U-953, and ends up in Norway for repairs. So if it isn't direct hits, it's repairs that haven't been repaired, or it's just problems that the boat is having on its own. On his second leave, we know how wonderful his first leave was. On his second leave, he finds out his parents and sister are now dead, the result of an air raid. And when he sets out again, the boat is in such disrepair, he has to let a 7-ship convoy slip through his fingers, unscathed, as the outer torpedo doors wouldn't open all the way. So it's while he's docked. Once again, he attempts to make plans to escape to South America, as it turns out a lot of Germans did. I guess he'd had enough, and I can understand his feelings. But he's sent out one final time, and it's during this final voyage at sea that the war would end, and he receives a radio message of capitulation, and goes on to spend some time in camps. And the man makes repeated escape attempts and succeeds, before finally being able to make his way back to Germany in the autumn of 45, and eventually makes his way here to the U.S. And I believe he died in 2013. I think it was April. So a very, very interesting account, and that was just a brief rundown of Iron Coffins. But reading an objective history of submarine warfare is fine and dandy, but when you can read a gentleman's account who was actually there in the subs surviving this stuff, you can't compare. So anybody interested in sub warfare, read Iron Coffins by Herbert Werner, and you'll enjoy it. So regarding the game itself, the Hunters, I have been playing that, and it was easy to learn. I was reluctant to learn another game, and I had a lot of games that I'm in the middle of, and I thought, I don't have time for this, but didn't take any time at all. Picked it up in probably 20 minutes, and my little game table is completely covered with charts, and that's basically it. There's no game board for this thing, so it's just primarily charts. Comes with a counter sheet, small counter sheet, and not all the counters. That is to say, many of the counters are blanks, so your counter density is extremely low. And I don't the game. It's the mechanics of it. I understand, okay, and I'll get more into this. I understand a lot of the appeal. It's fluid design, easy to learn. It's smooth. There isn't a lot of snags or hangups. You don't find yourself repeatedly looking back on the rulebook, scouring for something that you don't understand or isn't clear. It's damn clear. And to go back to the charts, you've got a number of charts that you roll on when you encounter a ship to see what kind of ship it is. Is it a freighter? Is it a tanker? Is it a small freighter, etc.? And then you can also find out the exact tonnage of the ship and the ship's historical name. And that's my understanding that all these ships that you can choose from are, in fact, historical ships that were sunk during the war. So these aren't made up things. And then you have your combat chart and then your ship chart, which you keep track of any damage, your torpedoes, etc. Uh, Random events chart, which I found myself forgetting to access. I think when you roll during a certain time as two sixes or two ones, you need to consult this and see what happens. Um, Depending on what ship you choose, and I think you have your choice of 8 different boats. I picked a Type 7B, and I wanted a Type 7C because that's the boat they use in Das Boot, and I thought that'd be cool. But to use that, you start later in the war, and you want to start as early as possible in the war because that'll allow you to accrue more tonnage as you go on. So the 7B allowed me to do that. So that's the ship I used, and of course, based on that, will determine to greater or lesser extent where you go. So with my 7B, I roll on my patrol chart and end up in the British Isles a lot during 39 and I think part of 40, and encountered a number of individual unescorted ships, which were fun picking off. And I think I encountered uh, a ship during the day that was initially unescorted, and I had trouble picking this thing off. I think I had some misses, some duds, and before I knew it, the ship had become escorted. Received some hits via depth charges and received damage to a couple of things. I forget the one, but I was able to fix it. And then, of course, the dive planes, as I mentioned, I tried to fix those, and they ended up being unfixable. So luckily, I was able to go to refit and get those fixed. And you're able to refit during each patrol. So anything that gets damaged, almost inevitably, will get fixed at some point. So I had a lot of fun. Now, at times, I felt like it was tedious, and the best way I can describe it is not necessarily a knock on the game, though it sounds like it. The best way I can describe what I'm trying to say, and specifically this game, is if you're not under attack and or receiving damage, there's only so much going on. It's when you're being hunted, and it's when you're trying to evade being hunted. It's when things go wrong. It's when you receive damage. Everything seems to be sped up. The excitement level goes up. It seems to be more of a chaos factor. When you're just hunting ships, that's fine. You're accruing tonnage. That's the name of the game. But oddly enough, that gets old, and it sounds crazy saying it, but it does. I found myself a lot more on edge. The like I say, the excitement level went up infinitely once I became hunted, and especially if something had occurred damage-wise that I was forced to try and fix or try and deal with. When that stuff's going on, the game is at its greatest. Otherwise, it's still a good game, but I guess personally, I just like having more to do. Now, for somebody who is just your casual wargamer, could take it or leave it when it comes to naval stuff, specifically sub stuff, I don't know that this is your game. And I say that not reluctantly, but as a disclaimer for your own good. If you don't like the subject matter, I'm gonna bet you're probably not gonna like this game. It's a good game. Don't get me wrong. Its design is impeccable. It's like a when you're playing it, it's like a well-oiled machine, as they say. Everything's functioning, working great. Hats off to the designer. He did a great job. But it all boils down, I think, to the subject matter. And if you're not into subs, you could probably live without this game. And that's not a bad thing. There's other stuff out there for you, I would hope. If you do like subs, did this game reinvent the wheel, so to speak, when it comes to sub games? Well, I don't know that it did because, first of all, I haven't played that many of them. There might be some people out there that would disagree and say that it is the greatest thing since, I don't know, since the last greatest thing and until the next greatest thing. But personally, I enjoyed it. I don't know that I will be purchasing another sub game anytime soon, if ever. And that's not a knock on the game necessarily. Uh, I'm not a big naval fan. I do appreciate the sub stuff. There's some excitement there for sure. But I'm more of a land lover. So I guess that part of me was lured into this game from what other people said about it, and I try not to do that. I try not to ride the hype that is the bandwagon of everybody else saying, "Oh, it's great. Oh, it's wonderful." I try and decide that for myself, which I guess is what I did, but at least initially I was intrigued by the amount of attention this game was getting, and I suppose I'm still a little confused. I just don't see where the amount of attention this game received, where this game merits the amount of attention it received. And I don't know if you would agree or not, but having played this, it's a good game. It's not fantastic. It's not the end all be all. It's not the bee's knees, as some people would say. But it is a good game. And if you like sub games, well, then maybe it's a great game. But like I said, is it the reinvention of the wheel? The amount of tension that this game has received, has it really warranted it? It's hard to say. So with the hunters, what would I recommend? Again, the question is, do I go buy this thing? If you like sub games, yeah, go buy it. If you're just a casual gamer who could take it or leave it when it comes to naval stuff, specifically sub stuff, then leave it. You don't need it. But if you're into the subject matter, you're going to like it. In fact, you might love it. So that might be a confusing review, but hopefully it sheds some light and perhaps a different spectrum of light than all the other reviews this game has received. And I'm glad it's received a lot of attention as Consim Press and specifically Consim World. I'm a big fan of, and they have, of course, the next sub game coming out dealing with the Pacific, and I won't be purchasing that just because A, I'm not a big fan of the Pacific Theater, and B, uh, one sub game is enough for me for a while. This thing will satiate any sub urges I have for a long time to come, and it's a good game. It's a solid game. So there you go, the hunters, and ultimately, you're just going to have to decide for yourself. It looks like sometime soon I'll be heading back to land, though, and I actually placed an order for Army Group Narva, and this game looks fantastic. I think I mentioned it actually a few shows back. Came out, looks like 2012, from Three Crowns Game Productions out of Sweden, and these guys are independent game producers. Of course, that's my people in Sweden, or should I say some of them, the rest of my people are in Germany, heritage speaking. So Designer Steven Ekstrom and placed an order for this yesterday. Chip pull game. Um, as a continuation of the Leningrad and Novgorod offensive of January 44, the Soviet Estonian operation pushed the front westward to the Narva River, aiming to thrust deep into Estonia. And Stalin's main strategic goal was a quick recovery of Estonia as a base for air and seaborne attacks against Finland and an invasion of East Prussia. The German answer was a stout defense for the possession of the strategically important Narva Isthmus, and Army Group Narva is a board game depicting this event in time. So that's that, and the history, of course, intrigues me because this is not a subject that you see, specifically this area and time is not something you see gamed a lot. In fact, I looked it up, and I think there's maybe one other game that deals specifically with this. Goes on to say the Soviet Union established a number of bridgeheads on the opposite bank of the river in February. Subsequent attempts failed to expand their toehold. German counterattacks annihilated the bridgeheads to the north of Narva and reduced the bridgeheads south of the town, stabilizing the front until July of 44. And the game covers the first 3 months of this bridgehead campaign, where I think each turn represents a week. It says it can be learned in 30 minutes, easy to digest. You got a challenge for the more experienced players, and is built around the same system of rules that shaped Königsberg 45. So any of you familiar with that? Well, this apparently is similar. 300 counters, nice size map, a couple of dice. And if you go to the Geek, there are some pictures of what looks like somebody's daughter hunkered over the map for some reason. Um, Map looks damn good. So yeah, I'm excited to get this thing, and I plan to do a full show regarding this game and the history it is simulating. So stay tuned for that, and hopefully this arrives without a hitch. As I said, I am ordering this from Sweden. It always makes me nervous to order things internationally. I don't know, the chances for things of getting screwed up are just increased so dramatically. Anyway, maybe I just like to worry. So there's that, and we can look forward to that. Also, I thought I'd mention briefly before I pull the plug on this episode. Um, Notice some things here and there about Bolt Action, the miniatures game. I think that's depicting World War II stuff that depicts stuff at the individual soldier level. I have that and have attempted to play that here and there just to get a feel for that level. And I don't know. It seems like an awful lot of dice rolling, which I guess makes this. That's one of the indicators that this is more of a game than a simulation. Is the amount of dice rolls, and there's a lot. But that's not necessarily bad in and of itself. I guess the problem for me is Flames of War, the other miniatures World War II, I guess platoon level game, really did it for me. The scale felt right. Um, it didn't feel too gamey, at the expense of actual, I don't know, simulation. The history, a lot of the history is still there. You can still faithfully depict certain historical situations as opposed to the individual. You got to kind of like use your imagination and make stuff up. Sorry, but when it comes to scenarios uh, on the individual soldier level. But anyway, I digress. I guess what I'm getting at is apparently, and I haven't played it for a while either, but apparently people are getting bored with Flames of War. They bought all the stuff, and I understand. Flames of War, the marketing for that game is brilliant. And don't get me wrong, it's brilliant. What they did was they have a mid-war period, so the vehicles, and for that matter, the troops that you buy. Well, if you want to do mid-war, well, you got to have the mid-war stuff. But then if you want to do early war, well, you got to. If you're anal and fanatic like I am, you can't use mid-war stuff for that. You got to use the early war stuff. So then you got to buy the early war stuff. Well, then if you want to do late war, which is the bulk of your awesome Soviet German stuff and Operation Migration and all that, Then you want the later war stuff. So by the time you get half of the stuff that you need to play any particular period, you probably have refinanced, remortgaged the house or whatever. But then, and this is what irritated me, and I can see where other people took offense. It wasn't as if, how do I put this? It wasn't as if they had enough stuff produced that you could buy and were taunted and tempted to buy. Then they come out with yeah, I already said this, the early war. And the early war, I guess originally it was just the mid to late war stuff you could buy. But then they come out with the early war stuff. So then you've already accumulated all this stuff. And then they're like, hey, look what you could play. But you got to have all this. And it just kind of irritated me. And it shouldn't, because all they're doing is providing an opportunity and more stuff for you to game with. But I don't know. I felt like it seemed like all they kind of cared about was just pumping stuff out and getting you to buy it. And maybe that's just me. I don't think so. I think some other people felt that way. But I think what it did is it turned some people off. And this stuff had been gamed so heatedly, so heavily for quite a while. I think people burned themselves out on it. And people are people. They're fickle. They want something else. They want to do something different. They want the next thing. And apparently the next thing is this bolt action stuff. And as I said, I've gamed it a little bit, but it ain't there for me. It doesn't do it for me. And I can't conceivably justify buying a whole bunch of stuff so I can game something at a different scale with a different rule book. So what am I getting at? I'm not sure. I guess what I'm saying is when it comes to miniature stuff, and I guess what got me on this whole tangent was, like I said, I noticed some things being posted recently, and bolt action has some problems, and I agree. There's nothing wrong with Flames of War. So you burn out on it? Okay, well, play something else. But when it comes to miniature stuff, that is a lot of money that you're spending. Adapt, adapt another rule set that you might already have to conform to the stuff you already have. So you're tired of Flames of War, but you have all this stuff. Well, A, you can sell it, or B, if you got Conflict of Heroes, that game was designed with miniatures in mind. I don't know if obviously it wasn't intended to be played specifically with miniatures as it is a board game, but I think the designer mentioned that he had miniatures in mind when he was designing it. So, and I've done this. I've adapted the Conflict of Heroes rule set to all these miniatures that I have from Flames of War, and it works great. So I guess my point is, you're bored with Flames of War, do something different. I'm not saying don't get into the bolt action thing. If that's what you want to do, fine, do it. But you can save yourself some money and just be maybe a little innovative and adapt. I don't know, even ASL that can be played with miniatures if you're smart about it. But I've adapted the Conflict of Heroes rule set to my Flames of War stuff, and it's worked great. And as I said before, Flames of War in general it's perfect in my opinion as far as miniatures games go. I don't really see a reason for somebody to branch out and get something else. And I know the next miniatures thing's going to come along, the next Flames of War, and the next generation of whoever is going to buy all the stuff for it. But you can't do much better than Flames of War. And well, I'm not sure how I got off on a tangent with that, but there's the miniature stuff. And then I know there's a lot of people that they won't touch miniatures with a stick. They wouldn't even let their neighbor touch it with a stick. I don't know what it is. I understand if it's not your thing. You need the hexes and the counters. I need it myself. I need it in my life. I don't want it. I need it. But with miniatures, there has to be something said. To be able to play with that stuff and still feel confident in who you are, if that makes any sense. Because a lot of people, I think they're afraid of what other people think. Literally, you're pushing around little soldiers and little guys, and if you're not careful, you're going to catch yourself making gun noises and explosions with your mouth. And a lot of people have trouble with what other people would perceive you as or personify you as if they saw you do this. And I think that prevents a lot of people from doing it, and I think it's crap. I think it's crap because that's a stupid reason not to do something. I'm not saying everybody does that, but I know there's some people out there, they're afraid to do it because they're afraid it isn't quote unquote manly enough or cool enough or tough enough. You know what I'm saying? So that's just junk. And if you haven't played Flames of War, you don't need a ton of stuff. Granted, you need a fair amount of it, but that's part of the fun, I guess, also of playing it is basing this stuff and painting it. And if you're into that, then that's a bonus. If you're not, then that's a curse. But either way, um, so for all you hardcore hexes and counter games, try not to knock too hard on the miniatures guys. They're doing something that perhaps we are not courageous enough to do ourselves, or are perhaps too pretentious to play. And that's a problem as well. We're all, each and every one of us, our own individual ambassador to the wargaming community, and we all have an opportunity to make people feel welcome and at home, and also to welcome them, any newcomers, into the fold. And if you're going to be pretentious and knock other people for what they do, that's not cool. So maybe try and cut that out or limit it as much as possible. And I'm done preaching. I'm not even sure why this stuff came out of my mouth, but it did. So I think with that, rather than me continue on my little soapbox, I will call it a day. And again, with the hexes and soldiers.blogspot.com, I also mentioned that I acquired a new job working for the post office, living here in New Orleans. It looks like Amazon.com has struck a deal with the U.S. Post Office, and I will not get in trouble by revealing or divulging this information because it is common knowledge. Anybody can look this up and find it out. Amazon wants to have USPS deliver packages on Sunday, and apparently this will help the USPS compete with what FedEx and UPS. And I am told that I will be primarily delivering on Sundays, but that I will be getting all the hours that I can stand throughout other days as well. So I don't know a schedule yet. I start training in the little mail truck next week. So you guys see those mail trucks rolling around, think of me. I will be doing that. And working in North Kenner, which I have never even stepped foot in. They're going to have me deliver packages and going up and down streets and avenues and boulevards, and I've never stepped foot in that place in my entire life, so I don't know how that's going to work. I hope and assume that they have a way of familiarizing somebody with an area. I'll probably have like GPS or something on these scanners they use to scan the packages. Either way, what I'm getting at is now that this is going on, I don't know if shows will be posted roughly a week at a time. I think that's what I'm averaging. So if some time goes by and it's a week and a half, or for God's sakes, 2 weeks, never fear. Hopefully nothing has happened to me. I'm not trapped under something heavy and can't get to my phone or the computer. I'm simply working. So just hang tight and I'll get to you. And with that, I think I'll let you guys go. And hopefully you enjoyed this episode. I try to do my best and make them entertaining and informative. Try and find the right balance between the two. But there's that little comment section underneath. And I know a lot of you guys are driving when you're listening to these. Hey, you just ran a red light. No, just kidding. But feel free to comment underneath and let me know how I'm doing. Give me a thumb, either up or down. And yeah, it's just nice to hear from you guys. And as I said in the last episode, if there's something specifically you want me to touch on, a particular historical era, a particular game, anything, I'm open to ideas, and we'll take it from there. So, with that said, I leave you with this. Thanks for listening, and keep gaming.